I did not lose my home all at once. It happened the way erosion happens, quietly, patiently, grain by grain, until one day you look around and realize the ground beneath your feet is no longer solid. The morning I understood this, I stood in my bedroom doorway and watched a dog sleeping where I once did. Not on a blanket. Not on a mat. On my bed. Her paws twitched in a dream, her breathing slow and content, while my pillow lay discarded on the floor. The sheets smelled unfamiliar, like someone else's detergent, sharp and artificial. I remember thinking absurdly that even the air in the room no longer recognized me. My son stood nearby, arms crossed, expression neutral in that practiced way people use when they don't want to argue. "She sleeps better here," he said. "Her joints hurt." I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because at 78, you learn how quickly protest is labeled trouble. I turned away before my face betrayed me. They had moved my things to the laundry room. That was how they phrased it, moved, as if it were an upgrade. As if proximity to a washing machine could replace 40 years of sleeping beside the man I loved. The cot was narrow, metal, foldable, temporary in the way they intended my presence to be. That was the night I did not cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because something deeper than hurt had begun to wake up. When my son first asked if they could stay just for a little while, he spoke gently, carefully, like a man stepping onto thin ice. "Just until we get back on our feet." I didn't ask questions. Mothers hareli do. Widows even less. I prepared the guest room myself. Fresh sheets. Towels folded just so. A small vase of flowers on the nightstand, because I still believed kindness was a language everyone understood. In the beginning, they thanked me. They complimented my cooking. They spoke to me like I was still the owner of the house. That phase passed quietly. First, they needed more room. Then the children needed space. Then it became inconvenient to keep asking. My study became a playroom. My den became storage. My kitchen became reorganized. Each change came with a smile. Each smile carried the same message: you don't really need this anymore. I told myself it was temporary. That families adjust. That love requires flexibility. What I didn't realize was that flexibility, when unreciprocated, turns into disappearance. At dinner, my voice began to fade. Not intentionally. Not dramatically. I would start a sentence and find it interrupted. I would tell a story and watch eyes drift away halfway through. When I stopped speaking altogether, no one seemed to notice. I learned how to eat quietly. How to move without being in the way. How to apologize for existing too loudly. Even the grandchildren learned the rhythm. "Grandma, you're slow." "Grandma, you talk too much." "Grandma, that's old-fashioned." They didn't mean harm. That was the worst part. Harm without malice leaves no one accountable. The dog, she was the only one who still came looking for me. She would rest her head against my knee when no one was watching. Follow me down the hall like she was afraid I might vanish if she didn't keep track of me. The day they decided she shouldn't sleep in the laundry room anymore was the day my place officially ended. "She needs comfort," my son said. I remember thinking how strange it was that comfort could be so selective. That night, lying on the cot, listening to the spin cycle hum like a tired heartbeat, I realized something painful but clarifying. They did not see me as displaced. They saw me as adjustable. Money had been part of the arrangement long before the house. There was always a bill. Always a delay. Always a promise. At first, they asked. Then they hinted. Then the envelopes simply appeared where I would find them. On the counter. On my chair. Once, on my pillow. I paid them all. Not because I was wealthy, but because I believed contribution equaled belonging. That belief cost me dearly. When I finally gathered the paperwork, bank statements, receipts, the deed, I felt something unfamiliar: certainty. The house was mine. Entirely. Legally. Undeniably. And for the first time in years, that fact mattered. The lawyer was calm. Efficient. Kind in the way professionals are when they've seen stories like mine before. "You have every right," she said, tapping the document gently, "to reclaim your home." Reclaim. Such a powerful word for something that had always been mine. My signature felt heavy, but not hesitant. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I didn't explain myself repeatedly. I placed the notices on the table one quiet morning and poured myself tea. Their reactions were louder than any argument I could have made. Shock, anger, disbelief. How could you do this to family? The question hung in the air. I answered softly. How could you do this to me? They packed in pieces. Slowly, reluctantly. The house changed as they left. It didn't become empty, it became honest. Rooms breathed again. Walls remembered themselves. Silence returned, not the suffocating kind, but the peaceful one. When my son handed me the spare key, his hand trembled. I didn't realize, he said. I know, I replied. That was the truth. He hadn't realized, because I had made it easy not to. That night, I slept in my bed again. The dog curled at my feet. The house settled around us like it recognized me. I stared at the ceiling and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not victory. Not revenge. Belonging. The days after they began packing felt strangely suspended, as though time itself had stepped back to watch what would happen next. I did not rush them. I did not hover. I moved through my house quietly, reclaiming it not with force, but with presence. Each box that left the front door took something with it: noise, tension, entitlement. The air grew lighter with every trip to the car. Sharon avoided me at first. When we passed in the hallway, she turned sideways as though I were an obstacle rather than a person. Her voice, once sharp with authority, softened into something brittle and uncertain. She spoke loudly on the phone to friends and relatives, making sure I heard words like unfair and heartless. I did not respond. Silence, I had learned, was no longer my weakness. Michael, on the other hand, grew quieter by the day. He moved through the house carefully, like someone walking through a place he feared might collapse under his feet. I noticed how often he paused, staring at walls or doorways, as though memories were finally catching up with him. One afternoon, I found him standing in the living room, holding an old photograph they had not yet packed. It was of him as a child, sitting on his father's shoulders in the backyard. He didn't notice me at first. I forgot this was here, he said, mostly to himself. Yes, I replied. You forgot a lot of things. He didn't argue. I began restoring the house one room at a time, not all at once, not dramatically. Just gently, the way you restore a garden after a harsh winter. I brought my chair back into the living room. The one they said took up too much space. I dusted the shelves they had cleared and returned my books to their places. I washed the kitchen towels I preferred and folded them neatly into the drawer. These were not acts of rebellion. They were acts of remembrance. The house responded in its own quiet way. The floors creaked less angrily. The walls no longer felt tight. Even the light seemed to fall differently, warmer, less strained. At night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. My dreams were not loud. They were steady. The grandchildren were the hardest. They didn't understand eviction notices or boundaries. They only knew that rooms were changing again, that boxes were replacing toys, that adults whispered too much and snapped too often. One evening, the youngest stood in my doorway holding a stuffed animal with one ear missing. Are we being bad? He asked. No, I said immediately. You are not. Then why are we leaving? I knelt carefully, my knees protesting, and looked him in the eye. Because grown-ups sometimes forget how to be careful with things that aren't theirs, I said gently. And sometimes, they need to be reminded. He nodded, not fully understanding, but trusting the tone of my voice. He hugged me tightly, then ran back down the hall. I watched him go with a heaviness in my chest, but not regret. Teaching kindness does not require sacrificing dignity. The dog sensed the change before anyone else. She stopped pacing. Stopped whining at doors. She slept peacefully again, always near me, always choosing my presence when given the chance. On the last morning before they moved out completely, I found her sitting beside my bed, tail thumping softly, eyes alert. She knew. Animals often understand justice better than people. The final day arrived quietly. No shouting. No accusations. Just movement. Boxes stacked. Car doors closing. The sound of tape tearing away from cardboard. Sharon barely looked at me. When she did, her expression held something like disbelief, as though she still couldn't accept that I had not folded, not softened, not retreated. Michael came to me before they left. He stood awkwardly, hands clasped together like a boy again. I should have seen it, he said. I should have stopped it. Yes, I answered. You should have. He swallowed. I'm sorry. It was the first apology that did not ask for forgiveness in return. I accept that you're sorry, I said. That doesn't mean things go back to how they were. He nodded slowly. He understood now. Or at least, he was beginning to. He handed me the keys without hesitation. When the door finally closed behind them, the sound echoed, not with loss, but with finality. I stood alone in the center of my living room for a long time afterward. No television noise. No hurried footsteps. No tension humming in the walls. Just me. And the house I had built a life inside. I walked from room to room, touching surfaces like a greeting. The kitchen counter. The banister. The window by the stairs where sunlight always lingered in the afternoon. In the bedroom, I smoothed the quilt and sat on the edge of the bed. The dog curled up beside me with a satisfied sigh. For the first time since my husband died, the house did not feel like it was missing something. It felt complete. That evening, I cooked a simple meal for myself. Nothing fancy. Soup. Bread. There. I ate at my own pace. I didn't rush. I didn't apologize for taking my time. After dinner, I sat by the window and watched the streetlights come on one by one. Neighbors passed by, unaware of the quiet revolution that had taken place inside my walls. I thought about how many women shrink without noticing. How often kindness is mistaken for permission. How easily love becomes leverage when boundaries are absent. And I thought about how close I had come to disappearing entirely. I did not feel anger toward them. I felt clarity. Anger demands energy. Clarity gives it back. That night, as I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, I spoke softly into the darkness, not to anyone in particular. I stayed, I said. And I chose myself. The house creaked gently, settling around me. And for the first time in a long while, I slept knowing I would wake up exactly where I belonged. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. Not lonely, quiet in a way that felt earned. I woke when my body decided it was time, not when someone else needed the kitchen or the bathroom. I brewed my tea slowly, letting the steam rise without rushing it away. The house no longer felt like something I had to navigate carefully. I moved freely again. For years, I had mistaken stillness for emptiness. But now I understood the difference. Emptiness feels hollow. Stillness feels full. Each morning, I opened the curtains and let the light pour in. Dust floated lazily through the sunbeams, and instead of irritating me, it made me smile. Dust meant no one had been rushing through the space, rearranging it without asking. The house was resting. So was I. I began sorting through the things they had left behind. A stray sock here. A broken toy there. Notes scribbled on scraps of paper, lists of things they never finished. I placed each item in a box without resentment. These were remnants of a chapter that had closed itself. When I found the laundry room cot, folded and leaning against the wall, I paused. For a moment, my hand rested on the cold metal frame. Not with bitterness, but with recognition. That small, uncomfortable bed had been the place where I finally woke up. I didn't throw it away. I donated it. Somewhere, someone else would use it, not as a symbol of erasure, but as a bridge to something better. The dog followed me everywhere those first few days. She stayed close, always watching my face, as if making sure I wasn't about to disappear again. You don't have to guard me anymore, I told her one afternoon, scratching behind her ears. We're safe. She wagged her tail anyway. Loyalty, I've learned, doesn't vanish just because danger does. People began to notice the change in me before I mentioned anything. The neighbor across the street waved more often. The woman at the market commented on my posture. You look lighter, she said. Like something lifted. I smiled but didn't explain. Not every victory needs an audience. Michael called a week later. I let the phone ring twice before answering, not to punish him, but to remind myself that urgency no longer belonged to him. Mom, he said. His voice sounded tired. Different. We're settling in. I'm glad, he replied. There was a pause. Sharon is still upset. I expected that. She says you chose a house over family. I closed my eyes briefly. No, I said calmly. I chose myself. The house just happened to be where I live. He didn't argue. I didn't realize how much you'd given up, he admitted. I thought you were okay. I was surviving, I said. There's a difference. Another silence. This one heavier, but honest. I want to do better, he said finally. That's good, I replied. Start by listening. After the call, I sat for a long time, staring at nothing in particular. Forgiveness, I realized, is not something you owe. It's something you offer when and if you are ready. I wasn't there yet. And that was okay. I began making small changes for myself. I repainted the bedroom a soft, warm color I'd always loved but never chosen because someone else found it impractical. I moved the furniture back where it felt right to me, not where it made the most walking space for others, planted new flowers in the garden, ones that required patience. Nothing flashy. Just steady growth. Every choice, no matter how small, felt like a declaration. One afternoon, I found myself laughing out loud at something on the radio. The sound surprised me. It had been so long since laughter had come naturally that hearing it echo through the house felt unfamiliar, like discovering a room you'd forgotten existed. I let it stay. There were moments, of course, when memory crept in. I would pass the den and remember children sprawled across the floor. I would open a cupboard and recall hands reaching past mine without asking. But memory no longer ruled me. It visited, and then it left. A month passed. Then another. The house settled fully into its own rhythm again. I hosted a small gathering for friends, tea, biscuits, soft conversation. No noise. No chaos. Just presence. One of them looked around and said, "It feels like you're finally home." I nodded. "I am," I said. That night, as I locked the door and turned off the lights, I felt something solid beneath my feet. Not just floorboards. Ground. I had not reclaimed a house. I had reclaimed authority over my own life. And if there is one thing I want anyone listening to understand, it is this. Kindness without boundaries is an invitation to be erased. Love that costs you your dignity is not love, it is endurance. You do not owe anyone your disappearance. I lay down beside the dog, who sighed in contentment, and whispered into the quiet room. This is enough. And for the first time in years, it truly was. Time has a strange way of changing shape once you stop living for everyone else. Days no longer rushed past me. They arrived, settled in, and left quietly when they were finished. I learned to recognize my own rhythms again, the hour when my knees needed rest, the moment when silence felt nourishing instead of heavy. I began keeping the windows open longer, even when the air was cool. I liked hearing the neighborhood breathe. Children playing down the street. A distant lawn mower. A train horn far away. Life moving forward without asking me to keep up. For years, I had bent myself to fit into other people's urgency. Now, I let the world adjust to me. One morning, while sorting old papers, I found a letter I had written years ago but never sent. It was addressed to no one in particular, just thoughts I had needed somewhere to go. In it, I apologized for being too much. Too slow. Too sensitive. Too attached to the past. I read it once, then folded it carefully. And then I tore it up. Some apologies are not meant to survive. Michael visited alone for the first time 2 months later. He stood on the porch uncertainly, as though unsure whether he was welcome. I opened the door before he could knock. "Come in," I said. The house felt different to him. I could see it in his eyes. The calm unsettled him more than anger ever could have. "You changed things," he said. "Yes," I replied. "I did." He nodded slowly. "It feels peaceful." "That's what happens when no one is fighting to be heard," I said. We sat at the table with tea between us. No interruptions. No raised voices. Just conversation that unfolded at its own pace. "I didn't see you fading," he admitted. "I thought you were choosing quiet." "I was choosing peace," I corrected gently. "But peace requires consent from everyone involved." He looked down at his cup. "I thought I was helping." "I know," I said. "But help that costs someone their dignity isn't help. It's control disguised as concern." He didn't argue. Before he left, he hesitated at the door. "I don't expect things to go back," he said. "But I hope we can build something new." "Perhaps," I answered. "But it will be built on respect this time." He nodded, and for the first time in years, he listened without needing to respond. As the seasons shifted, so did I. I joined a small community group at the library. Nothing grand. Just people who liked stories and quiet laughter. No one rushed me. No one corrected my opinions. No one rearranged my words. I remembered what it felt like to be a person instead of a role. Sometimes I caught myself reaching for old habits, apologizing unnecessarily, explaining myself too much, shrinking my wants before voicing them. When that happened, I stopped. I reminded myself, I am allowed to take up space. I am allowed to be comfortable. I am allowed to say no. Each reminder felt like strengthening a muscle I had neglected for years. The dog grew older, slower, gentler. We matched each other now. We spent afternoons in the garden, watching leaves move in the breeze. She slept with her head on my foot, grounding me in the present. I often thought about how close I had come to losing not just my home, but myself. And how quietly it had almost happened. One evening, as I locked the door and turned off the lights, I stood in the hallway and listened. No footsteps following me. No sighs of impatience. No whispered plans excluding me. Just the steady, comforting sound of a house that belonged to its owner. If someone had told me years ago that reclaiming my life would begin with a single boundary, I might not have believed them. Boundaries felt selfish then. Cold. Unkind. Now I know better. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors, with rules about who may enter. I no longer fear being alone. I fear only returning to a version of myself who believed she deserved less. That night, as I lay in bed, the dog breathing softly beside me, I thought about all the women who sit quietly in corners of lives they built. Waiting. Enduring. Disappearing. And I wished I could tell them this. You do not need permission to reclaim your life. You do not need approval to matter. And it is never too late to stand where you belong. I closed my eyes, steady and unafraid. The house held me. And for the first time in a very long life, I held myself. There is a moment, after upheaval, when life stops testing you and simply watches. That was how it felt as the months passed. Nothing dramatic happened. No new battles arrived at my door. Instead, life settled into something gentler, something honest. I learned how much energy I had been spending simply enduring. Without that burden, I felt lighter, not younger but clearer. I stopped explaining myself. When someone asked why I lived alone now, I simply said, because this is how I live best. And I let the sentence end there.
No justification. No apology.
No softening. People accepted it more easily than I expected. It turns out that confidence does not invite argument. It closes it. Michael called less often, but when he did, the conversations were different. Shorter. More respectful. He no longer assumed my availability or my agreement. Once he asked, "Is now a good time to talk?" The question caught me off guard. "Yes," I said. "It is." After the call, I sat quietly for a while, realizing that respect sometimes begins not with confrontation, but with consequence. Sharon never apologized. I made peace with that. Some people are not capable of looking inward without discomfort, and discomfort is something they avoid at all costs. I no longer needed her understanding to validate my experience. Freedom does not require closure from everyone. I grew protective of my peace. If a conversation felt draining, I ended it. If a request felt heavy, I declined it. If a day felt slow, I let it be slow. I stopped measuring my worth by usefulness. At my age, usefulness had cost me too much. One afternoon, while reorganizing a cabinet, I found an old set of keys that no longer belonged to anything. I turned them over in my palm, feeling their familiar weight. Keys represent access. And access, I had learned, must be earned. I placed them in a small dish, not to mourn them, but to remember what I had learned. The house continued to respond to me. Not magically, but truthfully. It felt warmer in winter, cooler in summer. Like it knew it no longer needed to brace itself against conflict. I repaired small things, loose hinges, chipped paint, not out of obligation but care. Caring feels different when it is chosen. Sometimes, I imagined my husband watching me from wherever he was, quietly approving. He had always believed in steady strength, in doing what needed to be done without making a spectacle of it. I learned, I whispered once, touching the door frame he used to lean against. Eventually. The dog slowed with age, but she stayed content. She slept deeply, ate slowly, watched the world with patient eyes. We were well matched now, two beings who understood that comfort is not excess but safety. One evening, a neighbor asked me, "Aren't you lonely?" I thought about the question carefully. Loneliness is not the absence of people, I realized. It is the absence of self. "No," I said finally. "I'm not." And I meant it. If I could return to the woman I was before, the one who folded herself smaller each day, I would not scold her. I would sit beside her. I would tell her that love does not require erasure. That kindness does not mean compliance. That silence should never be the price of belonging. I would tell her that one day she will stand up, not loudly, not dramatically, but firmly. And the world will adjust. I did not win a battle. I reclaimed my life. There is a difference. Now when I walk through my house at night, turning off lights one by one, I feel something solid beneath my feet. Not ownership. Authority. And if this story finds you, if you recognize yourself in it, let this be the part you carry with you. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to be comfortable. You are allowed to say enough. No matter your age. No matter your history. No matter how quietly you have lived. I turned off the final light and climbed into bed. The house was quiet. Not empty. Complete. There is a quiet dignity that comes from no longer needing to prove anything. I felt it most in the mornings, standing at the kitchen window with my tea warming my hands. The world outside moved as it always had, cars passing, birds settling on wires, neighbors heading off to lives that did not include me, and yet I did not feel excluded. For the first time, I felt complete without being required. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head. I stopped wondering how to soften my words before speaking them. I stopped anticipating disappointment. Instead, I lived in the moment I was in fully, without apology. That kind of peace does not arrive suddenly. It settles slowly, like dust after a storm. Michael visited occasionally. Always respectfully. Always with notice. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we sat in silence. He no longer tried to fill the space. And that, more than any apology, told me he was learning. The house became more than shelter again. It became memory without pain. Laughter echoed once more, not loud, not forced but real. I hosted quiet dinners, simple afternoons, conversations that ended naturally instead of being cut short. No one rushed me. No one corrected me. No one treated my comfort as optional. The dog aged gracefully. Her steps slowed, her naps grew longer, her devotion never wavered. On warm afternoons, we lay together near the window, sunlight brushing across the floor. I would rest my hand on her side and feel the steady rise and fall of breath. Life, uncomplicated. Sometimes, I thought about the version of myself who slept beside a washing machine. Not with anger. With compassion. That woman had been tired. Lonely. Afraid of losing love if she demanded respect. She did the best she could with what she believed then. And then, she learned. If there is wisdom that age brings, it is this. People will treat you how you allow them to. Not because they are cruel, but because boundaries clarify value. And when you finally draw them, some people will be angry. Others will adjust. But you will survive either way. I no longer feared being seen as difficult. I feared only betraying myself again. That fear kept me steady. One evening, as autumn settled in, I walked through my house and turned off the lights one by one. Each room felt familiar. Loyal. I paused in the doorway of my bedroom and looked back, not out of longing but gratitude. This space had held me through loss, through silence, through awakening. It held me still. I lay down, the dog already asleep beside me, and listened to the house breathe. Not tense. Not strained. At peace. And if this story has reached you, if you recognize yourself somewhere in these quiet moments, let me leave you with this. You do not need permission to reclaim your life. You do not need approval to set boundaries. And it is never too late to choose yourself. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But firmly. I closed my eyes. I was home. And this time, I stayed.